Do you remember the smell that hit you when you walked through that door? Not perfume, not candles. Something deeper than that. Something that told you before you even took your coat off that everything was going to be all right. That was Big Mama's pot, and it had been going since morning. I'm Mama Lou, and today I want to sit with you a while because there are 20 dishes I need to tell you about. 20 suppers that came out of one pot, one burner, and more love than most people will ever understand. These were the meals that fed whole houses, big families, extended families, neighbors who knocked and stayed, people who showed up with nothing and left full, and Big Mama never once turned a single one of them away. So pull up a chair, let me take you back. Number one, neck bones and potatoes. Now, if you know, you know. And if you don't know, you were probably never hungry enough to find out. Neck bones were the cut nobody else wanted. The grocery store would tag them at 19 cents a pound on a good week, maybe 25 on a bad one, and Big Mama would look at that tag and see something nobody else saw. She saw Sunday dinner for 8 people. She'd rinse those neck bones in cold water, season them with salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and a little onion. Brown them in the bottom of that heavy pot, that old black pot she'd had since before any of us were born. And then she'd cover them with water and let them go. Low heat, all morning long. By the time church let out, the house smelled like something holy. She'd drop in the potatoes whole, let them cook down in that broth until they were so soft you could cut them with the side of a spoon. No knife needed, no fancy technique, just time and patience. Two things Big Mama always had in abundance. That pot fed 6 people on $3.50, and not one of us left the table hungry. Number two, pinto beans with ham hock. Beans were a religion in our house, not a side dish, not a backup plan. The main event, Big Mama would soak the pintos overnight in a big bowl on the counter, and by morning they'd be swelled up fat and ready. She'd drain them, put them in the pot with a smoked ham hock, diced onion, a bay leaf, and enough water to cover by 2 inches. That was her measure. She'd let that cook for 3, sometimes 4 hours. The ham hock would give up everything it had, all that smoke, all that salt, all that rich depth, right into the broth. By supper time, the beans were creamy and thick, and the broth had turned into something you wanted to drink straight from the bowl. We'd eat it over a piece of cornbread, and that was a full meal, a complete meal, a meal that stuck to your ribs and carried you through a hard day's work without complaint. I want you to think about how much wisdom that is. A ham hock, a bag of dried beans, an onion, and 8 hours of heat. That's it. That's the whole recipe, and it was better than anything I've eaten in a restaurant in 40 years. Number three, chicken and dumplings. There was a version of this dish that came out when somebody was sick, and there was a version that came out when somebody needed celebrating. And there was a version that came out on a Tuesday for no reason at all, except that it was cold outside and Big Mama felt like making it. All 3 versions tasted exactly the same because the love in them was the same. She'd use a whole chicken, not the breast, not the thighs, the whole bird cut up, skin on, bone in. Every bit of it went into that pot with water, celery, carrot, onion, salt, and pepper. She'd simmer it until the meat fell off the bone. Then she'd pull it all out, strip the meat, and drop it back in. Then she'd make the dumplings right there on the spot. Flour, baking powder, a pinch of salt, and enough milk to bring it together. Drop them in by the spoonful and put the lid on. Do not lift that lid. She would look at you with something close to fury if you lifted that lid. Those dumplings needed to steam 15 minutes. And when she finally lifted it herself, what came out was soft and pillowy and perfect. The whole pot cost less than $2.50. It fed everyone in the house and left enough for breakfast the next morning, heated up slow on the back burner. Number four, oxtail stew. Oxtail used to be cheap. I need you to hear that. There was a time when oxtail sat in the back of the butcher case with a price tag that made it the poor folks' cut. 49 cents a pound in some places, 69 in others. The butcher would throw it in without much thought, and Big Mama would take it home and turn it into the most complex, most satisfying thing you ever put in your mouth. She'd season those tails overnight, salt, garlic, allspice, thyme, a little browning if she had it. The next day she'd brown them in batches in the bottom of the pot, get that deep crust on them, then add onion, tomatoes, butter beans, and enough water to cover. She'd let that stew low and slow for 4 hours, sometimes 5, until the collagen in those joints had completely broken down and the broth was thick and glossy and the meat was pulling away from the bone without you even asking. You'd eat it over white rice, and I promise you there was not a single fancy restaurant in 1955 that was serving something better than what Big Mama was pulling out of that pot on a Saturday evening. Number 5, smothered chicken, the gravy. Lord, the gravy. That's what this dish is really about. The chicken is just the reason for the gravy. Big Mama would season her chicken pieces, salt, pepper, garlic, paprika, dredge them lightly in flour, and brown them in a little oil in the bottom of her cast iron Dutch oven. Once they were golden, she'd set them aside, and in that same pot, in all that fond, in all that beautiful browned up goodness stuck to the bottom, she'd make her gravy. Onions, bell pepper, a little flour, chicken broth, and enough seasoning to make it sing. Back in went the chicken, lid on, low heat, 45 minutes. By the end, that chicken was so tender it was nearly falling apart, and the gravy had worked its way into every crevice. You'd spoon it over rice, over mashed potatoes, over a piece of plain white bread if that's all you had, and none of those options was wrong. Every single one of them was right. Number 6, red beans and rice. New Orleans gave this dish to the world, and the world has never properly thanked them. In our house, Monday was red beans day because Monday was wash day, and wash day was long and hard and left Big Mama no time to stand over a stove. So she'd put the red beans on in the morning, soaked overnight with smoked sausage or andouille if she could get it, a piece of pickled pork if she couldn't, onion, celery, bell pepper, garlic, bay leaves, cayenne, and let the pot do the work while she worked. By evening, those beans had cooked down into a thick, saucy, deeply savory pot of perfection. She'd mash a few against the side of the pot with a wooden spoon to thicken the gravy, ladle them over long grain white rice, and that Monday meal was sometimes better than the Sunday roast. There's something in that. There's real wisdom in a recipe that rewards you for leaving it alone. Number 7, beef vegetable soup. This was the clean out the refrigerator soup, the end of the week soup. The soup that proved Big Mama could see value where other people saw garbage. She'd start with a soup bone from the butcher, sometimes free, sometimes a few cents or a couple of short ribs if she was feeling rich. Brown them, add water, let the broth build for an hour. Then in would go whatever needed to be used up: half a cabbage, 3 carrots, 2 potatoes, a can of tomatoes, a handful of green beans, an ear of corn cut off the cob, a turnip if there was one. No recipe card. No measurements, just eyes and instinct and decades of practice. Every single pot tasted a little different, and every single pot was good, because the base was always honest, the seasoning was always right, and the cook was always paying attention. That pot fed the family for 2 days, sometimes 3, and on day 3, with everything cooked down even further, it was the best it had ever been. Number 8, hog maw and collard greens. Now I know some of you are smiling right now, and some of you might be making a face, but let me tell you something. Hog maw, the stomach of the pig, stuffed and braised low and slow, is one of the most underrated dishes this country has ever produced. Big Mama would clean it, stuff it with seasoned ground pork, potatoes, onions, and cabbage, sew it up with kitchen twine, and nestle it in the bottom of her biggest pot. She'd add her collard greens around it. Greens she'd wash 3 times, stripped from the stem, torn by hand, along with a smoked turkey neck or a ham hock for depth. A little apple cider vinegar, a pinch of sugar, red pepper flakes, then water, low heat, and time. 3 hours at least, what came out was something that cannot be described to someone who has never tasted it. The greens were silky and pot liquored and perfect. The hog maw was tender and savory, and unlike anything else on earth. And the pot liquor, that dark green broth at the bottom, you sopped that up with cornbread and felt like you had been given something sacred. Number 9, Hoppin' John, black-eyed peas and rice, New Year's Day. Every single year without exception, Big Mama believed in this dish the way some people believe in church and some people believe in luck and some people believe in both at once. She'd make Hoppin' John on the first day of the year because black-eyed peas meant prosperity, and the greens she served alongside meant money, and the cornbread meant gold. The peas would go in with a ham hock, onion, garlic, and thyme. The rice would cook right in the pot with them, absorbing all that smoky, savory broth. One pot, 1 hour, one dish that carried the weight of hope for an entire year. She'd put a dime in the pot before it was done. Whoever found the dime in their bowl was supposed to have the best luck of all. I found that dime 3 years in a row, and I've been convinced ever since that she put it on my side of the pot every time. That's what Big Mama's love looked like, small, specific, and quiet. Number 10, chicken bog. South Carolina gave us chicken bog, and South Carolina should be proud. This is a rice dish, a thick, almost sticky one-pot rice dish made with a whole chicken, smoked sausage, onion, butter, and chicken broth. Everything cooks together. The rice absorbs the broth. The chicken falls apart into it. The sausage gives it smoke and richness. And what you end up with is something that sits somewhere between a thick stew and a pilaf and something altogether its own. Big Mama made this for big gatherings. It was a crowd dish, a double the recipe dish. A fill every bowl in the house dish. She'd start with a 12-quart pot, and somehow it was never quite enough. There was always someone holding out their bowl for just a little more, and she always had just a little more, because she planned for that, because she always planned for the extra person. That was not an accident. That was intention. Number 11, ham and cabbage. Simple, honest, unbeatable. A ham bone, a head of cabbage, potatoes, onion, and water. That is the entire ingredient list. And before you think that sounds like too little, I need you to remember what a good ham bone can do to a pot of water. It can transform it, it can turn it into something that tastes like it has 20 ingredients and 3 hours of technique behind it. Because in a way it does. The ham carried the labor of curing and smoking. All Big Mama had to do was unlock it. She'd put the bone in first, cover it with water, let it simmer for an hour until the broth was deep and hammy and golden. Then in would go the cabbage, cut in wedges so it held together, the potatoes whole if they were small, and the onion quartered. Another 45 minutes and it was done. A pot that cost almost nothing and tasted like everything. Number 12, catfish stew. Down south, catfish was the fish of regular people. Not salmon, not sea bass. Catfish from the river, or catfish from the man who brought it around in his truck on Friday mornings. 50 cents a pound. Sometimes less if you knew who to ask. Big Mama would make her stew with catfish fillets, diced tomatoes, onion, potatoes, corn, and a good strong broth seasoned with Old Bay and a little hot sauce. Everything went into the pot together and cooked until the fish was flaking and the potatoes were done, and the broth had taken on the sweetness of the corn and the brightness of the tomato. It was a Friday dish. Fish on Friday was tradition in our house, whether we were practicing that tradition for religious reasons or just because it had been so long that the tradition had become its own reason. Some things persist not because someone decided they should, but because they're too good to let go. Number 13, pork and sweet potato stew. This one right here. I think about this one when the weather turns cold and the sky goes gray and the day feels heavier than it ought to, because this was the cold weather pot. The coming out of the rain pot, pork shoulder cut in chunks, browned until deep and caramelized, sweet potatoes cut thick so they'd hold their shape, onion, garlic, thyme, a can of diced tomatoes, chicken broth, and a little honey stirred in at the end. The sweetness of the potato and the honey against the savoriness of the pork and the brightness of the tomato. It was a balance that felt almost mathematical in its precision. But Big Mama never measured a thing. She tasted, she adjusted, she trusted herself, and the stew rewarded that trust every single time. When you walked into the house on a cold November evening and that smell hit you, whatever had happened during the day fell away. Whatever weight you were carrying got a little lighter. That's what good food does. It doesn't fix things, but it makes things bearable, and sometimes bearable is exactly enough. Number 14, lima bean soup with ham. Big limas, butter beans, Ford hooks, depending on where you grew up and what your grandmother called them. Big Mama used the dried ones, soaked overnight the same as always. She'd put them in the pot with a smoked ham hock, diced onion, garlic, a little celery, salt and pepper, and enough water to cover. Let it cook for 2.5 hours. The beans would go creamy and thick, and the ham hock would have given everything it had to that broth. She'd ladle it into bowls over a piece of white bread laid flat in the bottom. The bread would soak up the broth and get soft and almost pudding-like. And that bite, the first bite where you got the bean and the broth-soaked bread all at once, that was the bite. That was the whole point of the dish. Some of you know exactly what I mean. And for those of you who do, I am glad you're here with me right now. Number 15, turkey neck stew. When Big Mama made this, it meant she'd been to the market early. Turkey necks were the kind of thing that sold out by mid-morning on a good day, because everybody in the neighborhood knew what they were worth. She'd brown them in a little oil, add onion, garlic, tomatoes, potatoes, carrots, and enough water to cover, and let the whole thing go for 2 hours until the meat was falling off those small, intricate bones. And the broth was rich and dark and deeply seasoned. Eating turkey neck stew required patience. It required attention. You had to work for the meat, pick around the bones carefully, find the good pieces tucked into the joints, but that work was part of the meal. It slowed you down. It made you present. You could not eat turkey neck stew and be somewhere else in your mind. The dish demanded your full attention, and in exchange it gave you something worth paying attention to. Number 16, creamed corn and salt pork. When the corn came in, Big Mama put up enough to last through winter. She'd cut it off the cob raw, scrape the cob with the back of her knife to get all the milk out, and freeze it in bags. Then in January or February, when the cold had been going on too long and everybody needed something that tasted like summer, she'd pull out a bag and make her creamed corn. Salt pork rendered down in the bottom of the pot until it was crispy and golden. Then in went the corn with all its milk, a little butter, a little cream if there was cream, a little whole milk if there wasn't, salt, black pepper, and a small pinch of sugar. She'd stir it constantly for about 20 minutes until it was thick and silky and tasted like a memory. She'd serve it over rice or with cornbread, and it was a whole meal, sweet and salty and unctuous and honest. Number 17, kidney bean and sausage pot. This was a weeknight dish, the kind of thing Big Mama could put together in 45 minutes after a long day when everyone was hungry and patience was low. Smoked sausage, sliced into rounds, browned in the pot first. Then onion, bell pepper, garlic, a can of kidney beans, a can of diced tomatoes, chicken broth, thyme, cayenne, everything in lid on 25 minutes. It was not the most elegant dish on this list, but it was reliable. It showed up every time. It never failed. And there is a kind of beauty in reliability that we do not celebrate enough. We celebrate the spectacular. We talk about the extraordinary, but the dish that shows up for you on a Tuesday night when you're tired and hungry and out of ideas, that dish deserves a little reverence too. Number 18, pot roast with root vegetables. This was Sunday dinner when there was a little extra in the budget. A chuck roast, 3 to 4 pounds, seasoned the night before with salt, pepper, garlic, and onion powder. The next morning it went into the pot, seared on all sides until deeply browned, then nestled in with onions, carrots, potatoes, a can of beef broth, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, and a bay leaf or two. Low oven, 250 degrees, all morning long. By the time the family came home from church, the smell in that house was indescribable. The roast had given itself completely to the pot. The vegetables had cooked down in the drippings. The broth had concentrated into a rich, dark, glossy gravy. You could cut that roast with a spoon. You could barely keep it together on the fork because it wanted to fall apart. And it fell apart beautifully right into the gravy, right over the potatoes, right onto a plate that you ate at a table surrounded by people you loved. That is a kind of richness that has nothing to do with money. Number 19, canned salmon stew. Now I know some of you are thinking canned salmon, but hear me out. In a household where fresh fish was not always possible, where the budget was what it was and the pantry was what it had, canned salmon was a legitimate protein and a good one. Big Mama would open 2 cans of pink salmon, drain them, pick out the large bones, but leave in the small, soft ones because those are good for you and you cannot taste them anyway. She'd put them in a pot with diced potatoes, onion, a little butter, whole milk, salt, black pepper, and a handful of parsley if there was parsley. 20 minutes, that's all. A thick, creamy salmon chowder that tasted like care and intention and the kind of love that works within its limits without apology. She served it with oyster crackers or saltines, and every bowl was as good as the one before it. There is no shame in canned salmon. There is only wisdom in knowing what to do with what you have. Number 20, gumbo. I saved this one for last on purpose Because gumbo is not just a dish. Gumbo is a philosophy. Gumbo is the whole argument I've been making for the last 25 minutes. Put in a pot and simmered until it becomes something that transcends its ingredients. Big Mama's gumbo started with the roux. That was the foundation. Equal parts flour and oil or fat, stirred constantly in the bottom of the pot over medium heat for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, until it went from white to blonde to peanut butter to dark chocolate. You could not rush it. You could not leave it. You had to stand there and stir, watching it transform, catching it at exactly the right moment. If it burned, you threw it out and started over. That was the rule. A burned roux contaminates everything. Once the roux was right, and when it was right, you would know it by the smell. A deep, nutty, almost smoky smell that had nothing in it of rawness. In went the trinity. Onion, bell pepper, celery stirred into that dark roux until softened. Then garlic, then the broth, chicken broth or seafood broth or both. Then the okra to thicken, then the protein, whatever Big Mama had. Chicken thighs, andouille sausage, shrimp, crab, all of it, if there was all of it, some of it, if there was some. It simmered for an hour. The okra would disappear into it, giving the gumbo its particular body. The roux would tie everything together, rich and dark and complex. And at the end, she'd add filet powder, ground sassafras leaves to finish it, and she'd ladle it over white rice in deep bowls, and the table would go quiet. Not silent, quiet. The particular quiet that happens when a group of people all encounter something perfect at the same time, and there are simply no words sufficient to the experience, that quiet. Big Mama would sit down last, pour herself a bowl, take her first bite, nod once, and say the same thing she always said. She'd say, "That'll do," not "that'll do," meaning just enough. That'll do meaning it meets the standard. It is what it should be. It does what it needs to do. It is right. That'll do. I want you to think for a moment about what we've been talking about today. 20 dishes, one pot. Cuts of meat that cost pennies, dried beans soaked overnight, vegetables scrubbed and peeled and cut by hand, broth built from bones, meals that fed 6, 8, 10, 12 people, meals that left enough for tomorrow, meals made by women who had every reason to be tired and short and who instead were generous and patient and magnificent. Big Mama did not have a cooking show. She did not have a cookbook deal. She did not have a restaurant or a platform or a following. She had a pot and a burner and a family that depended on her, and she turned that into art, into legacy, into the deepest kind of love there is, the daily, unglamorous, showing up kind. The depression taught her that nothing was wasted. The hard years taught her that flavor could come from anywhere. The lean seasons taught her to see a ham hock and a bag of beans, the way a sculptor sees a block of marble. The possibility was already in there. You just had to know how to find it. And we are losing that knowledge. We are losing it recipe by recipe, pot by pot, grandmother by grandmother. Every time one of our elders leaves us without having passed on what they knew, something irreplaceable goes with them. The hand that stirred that roux for 45 minutes without stopping. The nose that could smell when the neck bones were done. The eye that could look at a half-empty refrigerator and see a meal. That is what I want to honor today, not just the food, the intelligence behind the food, the love behind the intelligence, and the people, your people, my people, our people, who carried all of it on their hands and in their hearts through decades, that asked more of them than any generation should be asked to give. If you grew up eating any of these dishes, you carry something valuable. Your memory of that food is not nostalgia. It is testimony. It is evidence. It is proof that ordinary people with very little to work with created something that fed bodies and nourished souls and bound families together in a way that nothing else could. And if you have children or grandchildren or anyone who looks to you, tell them about it. Write it down if you can. Show them if you're able. Make the roux together and stand there and stir and explain why you cannot rush it. Let them peel the potatoes, let them smell the collards, let them ask why you put vinegar in the greens and take the time to answer. Because what we are really talking about when we talk about one-pot suppers is continuity. It is the thread that runs from that old black pot through every hand that stirred it to every bowl that held it to every person who sat down and was fed by it. That thread does not have to break. It only breaks if we let it. I'm Mama Lou. Thank you for sitting with me today. I'll see you next time. And in the meantime, go make something good. Make it in one pot, make it low and slow, and make enough for whoever might show up. Because somebody always does.